Well, good afternoon if you are on the East Coast of the United States. Good Irish tea if you are in Dublin or somewhere on the Emerald Island. Good Earl Grey tea if you are in London or somewhere like that. And good coffee if you're on the continent of Europe or somewhere in Asia drinking tea or coffee, or Australia. Welcome. This is Fred Plotkin on Fridays. That makes me Fred Plotkin. And Fred Plotkin on Fridays is presented by Adagio, the place where classical music happens. As you know, Adagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and making classical music and opera available to fans all around the world. And regular viewers know that I tend to have people on who delight me, who inspire me, and my guest today, Fran Marshall, Frances by her full name, but I call her Fran, delights me, amuses me, inspires me. We have worked together. We've done a lot together. Where are you joining me from, Fran?
Well, we're London. We're based in London, but we've just moved to Surrey, so we're technically, we're very close, but we're just in the Surrey border. But that's
and
where
while
we
we're
are
on
now.
the topic, are you drinking tea?
I'm drinking coffee, actually. I thought from a Guinness mug, but yeah, no, it's late in the evening here. It's cozy.
Well,
but how are you, my dear man?
I'm better for seeing you, my dear woman. So, Fran Marshall is a great artist, and I mean that. I appreciated her work even before I met her. Who is a photographer, and photography is one of the great arts. It's one of the newer arts, and we'll talk about photography and its requirements, its limitations, its advantages compared to other art forms. And her very special niche in the world of photography is that I think she's the greatest photographer of musicians. So we're going to talk today about the place where photography meets music, because one of them is visual, one of them is oral, acoustical. And I guess my first question is, how did you start in photography?
Well, aren't you so kind, first of all? How did I start in photography? Well, I just loved photography. I was always really drawn to it. I'm profoundly dyslexic, so I was always drawn towards imagery more than text. And I trained as a musician, I trained as a singer, and I was taking pictures the whole time. So it was just photographing my ecosystem, basically. And that's where it naturally started to emerge from that world. And I realized that this is the niche I want to stay in, because the career of a photographer is not something that I'd really comprehended as a thing. So it kind of just started developing naturally. And then I started getting hired, and then the career started happening. So that's basically how I came into that space. But I couldn't think of doing anything else at this stage. It's just something that I absolutely love.
Let's start with the real basics. What kind of camera do you use? And do you use film? Did you use film at the beginning of your career and now you don't?
Is it dreadful that I'd say I've always been digital?
No, that means you're a young woman.
Yes, I am. No, I've always been digital. I envy, well, to be honest, the respect I have for film photographers, because the thought of walking out of the shoot and not knowing if you got the shot makes me so terrified, even to think of that. And like when I've met Marty Saul, who you know from the Met, who's an opera photographer there, and she used to shoot on film, the operas, and that blows my mind, because it is so difficult. It's one of the greatest skill sets, actually, is to really get the light right for opera photography. And I don't know how you can, like, to walk out the door and know you had it. And then she would develop it over lunch and then send the negatives in, you know what I mean, in the afternoon. Like, that's just a different world. So the industry has changed hugely in the last 20 years. But I was just on the cusp where I never really touched film. Like, as a child, I had a tiny film camera, but that's about it. But yeah, no, the process is, for me, I use Canon. I'm exclusively Canon user. My lighting is pro photo. So I've always
talk about what you mean, your lighting pro photo. What is that?
So the lighting kit that I use is made by Profoto because it's wireless. It's wonderful. I can bring it anywhere. And it's small, it's compact, throw it on my bag, and then hop on a plane, hop anywhere. Not recently, but yeah, it's the most amazing kit that I love it, and I wouldn't use anything else. And then, yeah, my cameras have always been Canon. Don't ask me why. I've just gone there and never really moved on to anything else. But what I would say is that I don't get excited about the kit. I'm not a photographer who gets really energized by that. Some photographers really do. That's all they talk about, but I couldn't care less about the kit. It's not something that I really get excited about. I think I always see it as fancy pencils is the best way to think about it. I don't ever think it's about that. It's all about the person. It should never get in the way of the actual work that you're doing. So that's generally how I feel about it, if that makes sense. But which may sound sacrilegious to some photographers, but
well, actually, regarding the kit and that in general, I have seen you when you've worked set up really fast. And I'm someone who in my career has been photographed a fair amount by professional photographers, and they tend to have a setup. I was on a program the other day that will go out in the future, and the studio was set up relatively quickly, but everything had to be fine-tuned, the lights and so on. What has always struck me about your work when I've been with you and you've been doing a shoot is you go right into it. And talk please about this concept of light, because when you photographed me, I believe in 2016,
yes,
in Wexford, Ireland, I was working at the festival there, and it was a stormy day on the Irish Sea. It was kind of raw, and I was wearing black and white. I'm not sure why. And you photographed me in black and white in an area that is normally rather colorful, but it was the terrible light of the sea and then the spray, and I was freezing, and I was standing by the sea wall, and you said, don't move, don't move. The water was washing all over me, and they're like action shots, but you really quickly got the angle, the light, the natural light, my face, and where everything was lit. It happened in moments.
Well, like there's very little that compares to the natural light in Ireland, especially by the sea. So it's an insult to bring a light into that, I think. Yeah, like I think the reason I get into it so quickly is that people hate having their photograph taken. I hate having my photograph taken. Like I say to every client we work with, it's like, I can't believe people hire us to do this because it's torture. Like the whole process is torture. To have a camera that close to your face is awful. So I suppose, how would you feel if I take half an hour to set up my light while I'm looking at you and staring at you? You've way too much time to think about what's going on. So I just want to get straight into it so I don't lose you, and that's one of the things. So I always arrive ready to go, and I'll tend to know exactly where we're going. When we're setting up in a studio, it'll take a while, but we might have makeup and hair artists who are working with it. And we have a whole process around that. They're very much clued in. We're like, watch the energy, make sure it's very positive, and we'll keep that going. I don't want anyone thinking about the fact that they're having their photograph taken, because that is the worst thing that can happen on a shoot, is that you're aware. So I just want people to think that we're having a very weird, long conversation for the whole day.
You are very talkative. You were in New York,
noticed?
And you were in New York, and you came to photograph my mother. Yes. It was her birthday. We don't reveal her age, but she's much older than people think she is. She is famously beautiful, not because she's my mother. And I noticed that while you did the shoot rather quickly in her apartment, you spoke to her the entire time.
She's so easy to talk to. She's gorgeous.
Oh, thank you. But I suppose it struck me that was part of your process. When you were photographing me out of doors with the splash by the sea, I couldn't hear what you were saying anyway. So I was sort of imagining anything. And I further have to add, I was surprised when you just said that people hate having their photograph taken.
Oh,
I don't.
Do you not?
I love it. it's not vanity, but my feeling is take all the pictures you want, because so many of them won't be good, that the likelihood of you're getting a good one is greater. So just shoot away, keep
Well, I've always
photographing.
said that you're particularly enlightened as a human being, so you've just proved it there. But yeah, no, there are some people who really enjoy it. There was one composer I worked with in London, and I remember him saying to me that it's this really lovely tingling sensation he gets when he's been photographed, like around his body. And I thought that was really interesting. It's very different for a lot of people, because I always find the first 20 minutes of a shoot, there's these muscles that tighten, and the whole thing is just to get these muscles to relax the whole time, because from childhood people stick a camera in your face and you immediately are told to smile, no matter what your background, that's like a generic thing that happens to all of us at some point. So even when you're not smiling, there is a tension that happens here. So when I'm talking to somebody, that's the face I want in the camera and in the shot. It's not the face that I want when I bring the camera to my face. The second the camera comes in, I can see the difference between the person I'm speaking to and the person who's looking into the lens. So the whole day is about getting the shot of the person I'm talking to. So that's what I'm doing. Like, it is very deliberate. You wouldn't think it when I'm just rambling on, but it is actually very deliberate what I'm doing. But like, I love talking anyway, so thank Christ for that.
Do you think it distracts anyone that you're talking so much?
Yes, that's the whole point.
Okay,
I want them profoundly distracted.
If you're photographing an opera singer or an actor, as opposed, say, to a writer, where a writer will be focused on your words, an opera singer or an actor, especially if she's in costume, may be thinking of herself as her role. She may want to focus on something within her to transmit to the lens, not to you, but to the lens, because these people are often practiced at being in front of cameras and lenses.
Yes.
Has anyone ever said to you, please don't talk?
No. Well, but you're actually really touching on a point there that we try to deconstruct, is that when I started taking photographs of musicians and mainly singers, I've always been gravitating towards singers as well. We photograph all different types of musicians, but the really interesting bit is that they're so programmed to think within their role. But the issue with that is that how many Toscas are there? We need to find them. We need to find the actual singer themselves. And for me, an awful lot of operatic imagery around artists was centered around the ball gown and the opulent room. And it just got very sort of boring for me. I really wanted there has to be more to these, especially women who were it felt very objectifying, to be honest. It was all about the dress. And that's something, like, a lot of my early work is very much here up. It's just about really seeing who they are. And that's something that I became quite obsessive about, is really understanding what is it about this artist that makes you want to hear them, because I'm using a soundless medium to communicate, like, as we said, an aural experience. So how do I communicate that through my imagery to make you want to hire this artist? Because that's why I'm being hired. It's a conversion. I'm being hired to photograph somebody so they get hired for the roles that they want. And that understanding of breaking that down and finding out who they are is the essence of what I'm doing the whole time. And to find that individual aspect of them that makes them different, that they're comfortable with, that then we can align their whole brand with. And that's basically what we're doing the whole time. So I don't really unless we're doing an opera poster, a poster for a company, I never want to photograph them within their role. I want to show within them what they're trying to communicate to the world, so that a casting director will look at these images and say, I see her or him in that role. But that they remain themselves when they're presenting, and that can be really difficult. Like, it's a bit of a psychological warfare. And it is interesting to see how certain people react to that. But in general, that like, we've never had anyone say, no, I want to be seen as a single role. They all want to be photographed as themselves, because the opera world and classical music world in general is a very heavy brand that it puts on artists, as you well know. So it's about finding, our job is to find the voice of the artist, metaphorical voice, of the artist, and where does that fit then in this industry, you know, and making sure that they feel that authenticity to themselves.
Well, part of what I love about your work, and loved before I even met you, was that there was the voice of the artist in this silent thing, which is a photograph. It's not film, it's not audio, it's not you and I speaking as we are now. It is silent, except that I do often with your photographs hear not necessarily the voice of the singer, whose voice I may know, but a voice, an expression that comes through the imagery that is the magic and the alchemy of photography. And there are so many people who take pictures, and now that we all have phones, we all can take pictures, but most people don't know how. They don't frame the image very well. They're not conscious of the lighting. They, frankly, with these phones now, and maybe with your camera, you're able to tinker with the imagery so that you make it bolder, sharper, blurry, or whatever it is you want to communicate. And that's the point where we go from journalism to art. And nothing wrong with journalism, but with journalism, you are capturing a moment. With art, you're creating something from original material. And I felt that the shots you did of me were closer to journalism, which is fine. But they were notable to me because most shots that I've had taken of me for publicity, for whatever, tend to verge toward more, you know, the best angle, the best glow, the little more red in my cheeks, whatever you want, although my cheeks are always very red, but it can be tinkered with. Your images, I tend to find, have an immediacy about them that's part of their fascination.
Aren't you lovely?
Well, I have a good eye. I do have a good eye. Before we get away from something, you were talking about this moment where people are taught to smile, they sort of freeze like that. I don't know Dame Julie Andrews. I met her once in an unusual circumstance. We have the same dentist, and we both were coming out of sedation, and in the adjacent rooms. And
it's
my
the most
dentist,
ridiculous story. The same dentist as Julie Andrews.
I woke up before Dame Julie Andrews woke up. And my dentist tapped me. He knows I work in the arts, tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Would you like to meet someone very special?" I said, "Sure." And he said, "Come on inside." And she was like this, and sort of dreamily awakening. And she opened her eyes and she said, seeing me, "Oh, hello." I said, "Hello, Ms. Andrews. Nice to meet you." "Oh, but the honor is mine." "And how come you're here? Do you work for Dr. Lennon?" I'll say his name, Dr. Lennon. And I said, "No, I was a patient in the next room, and I too was sedated." And what a lovely thing for me to wake up and see Julie Andrews. And she said, "I'm not ready to say the same thing about you because I don't know you." And I said, "Well, that's fine." I said, "It's very nice to meet you." And she said, "May I tell you something?" And I said, "Yes, of course." She said, "You know, you have a lovely smile," flattering my dentist, of course. And she said, "When you have your photograph taken, I know people say that you should say cheese." She said, "But that doesn't form the correct shape of the mouth. What you want to say is money." And she held the position because Julie Andrews has been photographed millions of times. And I said, and I had sedation here, so I couldn't move on one side. I said, "Money." And she said, "Well, you'll get good at it eventually." But so do you ask your subjects to say anything like cheese or money or no?
No, I tend to. It's a good one though, and I'm going to take it off Julie Andrews.
Yeah, sure.
Who's going to?
You have to attribute it though to Julie Andrews.
I visually, well, yeah, I'll just pretend that I was the one in the dentist chair. No, but I can just, I visually transported to that story there, and I just thought about her waking up and looking at it as if it was some sort of Disney movie, you know?
And seeing me as the prince.
Yes, fabulous. No, a
Was
lot
it
of the
only
things,
half his mouth?
yeah.
Mobile.
I don't, you see, the thing is, we don't really have, because myself and Sophie do the shoots together. So, and that's in the last 5 years since we founded our company. So we don't really have tricks, I suppose. It's all about feelings. So you were really hitting on something there earlier that I loved, because you were talking about that singular voice that you get from the imagery, and that is just music to my ears, because if you take art out of it, you take music out, you take all that out of it, basically what you're talking about is a feeling, that the image gives you a feeling, and that gives you a feeling of the person that you're looking at. And that's what branding is. And the branding is a feeling. So if you think of any of the top brands that like whoever your phone is made by, your TV, whatever, you get a feeling when you think of the company, and that's because of the brand. So we create that then for artists. So like, it's just amazing that you said that, because I just feel like I can pack up and go home. That's perfect.
Not yet. I have a lot more to ask.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, where does it go up from there? I feel amazing. But yeah, that's what we're doing, and it's creating a feeling around the artist. Like I've always said this, I don't care about the pretty picture against the pretty wall in the pretty dress. Like that is the most boring thing to me. It's about what feeling are we communicating through these images, because that's what will change things, and we really do believe that the strength of any industry and genre is the marketing within it. Obviously, there's no question that the talent is there, but every art form, it's 50% the art form, 50% getting it out there, and we're part of the getting it out there portion. And we don't do the marketing ourselves, but we give marketing companies the tools they need to get it out there. So, and it's always much more empowering if there is a feeling and brand around the aspects and the tools they're being given. So yes, I'm thrilled that you said that. Thank you.
Sure. Remind me your website name so that our listeners can know. Is it marshalllight.com? marshalllightstudio.com?
marshalllightstudio.com. Yes.
Very good. 2 L's in Marshall.
Yeah, there's 3 L's in the middle there.
The 3 L's in Marshall Light.
Yeah. Because Sophie's surname is Light, because a lot of people think that it's Marshall Light as in the studio light, but no, Sophie's surname is Light, which is really useful. But we were worried it would sound like a beer, so it was like it was going to be Light Marshall or cigarettes. But yeah, no, I think it does work. It does work.
So actually, our saying this, you reminded me of something I didn't intend to bring up, and something I've never discussed with you, but I'm going to do it anyway. I have a wonderful cousin whose name is Joshua White.
Okay.
And his famous work, and he is famous, is the Joshua Light Show.
Okay.
And Josh, as I call him, was a young man in the late 1960s when the rock bands were playing at the Fillmore East, the Fillmore West, at places in London and Berlin and Hamburg, less so in France and Italy at the time, but really Northern Europe, Copenhagen perhaps. And the very famous light shows that would accompany the performances by Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Tina Turner,
amazing,
Led Zeppelin, I'm forgetting the band from California who everybody loves except for me, the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, who I did love a lot. These acts, Sly and the Family Stone, would hire Josh to create imagery that came out of the music. And he would often sit in a booth in the Fillmore East, and whatever came to his mind and his spirit at the moment as he listened to the music would then appear on the screen behind the band. So it was never the same twice. And the light show, as he calls it, had its wonderful period, and then he went on and did all kinds of other art and TV direction. But if you live long enough, you're rediscovered. And there were a bunch of exhibitions in 2019 about the Summer of Love of 1969. and at the Whitney Museum in New York and the Welcome Gallery in London, where Josh had a show, and he would be hired and get whole rooms to present his imagery. And they would play music from 1969, and Josh's images would appear.
Yeah.
And this would be parallel with photographs of rock musicians.
Amazing.
And so my question, which comes out of this, is I have been in photo shoots, either as a subject or attending a photo shoot, in which the photographer plays music.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do that?
Yes, always. Always.
Okay, because our experience was different because you photographed me by the sea. So
I was leaning against a car and you were leaning against a wall on the side of the beach.
I was holding.
You could barely hear me speak.
Against the wind. It was blowing me back. But so how do you select the music that you play? Is it ever the artist himself or herself? Or
oh, that'd be way too awkward for them. No.
Yeah.
We tend to, I'm a real playlist lunatic. Like I'm always, going through Adagio or going through Spotify and just checking, you know what I mean, who I want to listen to all the time. But we'll always ask who they want to listen to at the very beginning. And weirdly enough, you may not like this answer, it's never classical music that they ask for.
That's okay.
Isn't that interesting though? And I think because it does put out, when we're working with artists who are in that space, that is work for them. So if we're trying to pull them out of that space into their own place, I find it always very interesting, the artists that they pick. But most of the time they'll say, whatever you want. And then I'll put on my Kate Bush anthology or whatever has to come on. But yeah, I'm a big ballad queen. But yeah, I think music is an unbelievable energy provider. That sounds strange. But yeah, it's like if we're shooting in silence and I've forgotten to put on the music, I can really feel it very quickly, and I'm like, oh god, we always bring a speaker with us and stuff like that. So but a lot of the studios that we work with have sound systems, and we'll always check that. But yeah, it's hugely important. It's really important to keep that energy going, and music is something that just keeps you moving forward.
It's interesting. I did not plan to make this about dentistry, but by Dr. Lennon, when he got a streaming service a few years ago, knowing that I work in music and love music, would ask me to pick the music for my drilling and all the work.
Lovely.
And I introduce him to singers and to music, and I tend to pick opera when that's going on because I find it more relaxing. So basically I said I want the best of Montserrat Caballé, and we spelled it out. And so for an hour and a half of dentistry, I had Montserrat Caballé. And that to me is relaxing. But I must say, I would hate to have music playing while being photographed, because I'm so into music that it would distract me. It wouldn't give me energy. It would draw my focus from the work that you and I, or the photographer and I, are doing. Because I know that the energy I bring to a photograph is part of the work. As you said, it's 50-50. And just the other day, as I said, when I went and filmed a program, I asked someone there to take my iPhone and take a picture of me before, for the simple reason that I had not worn a tie since March 7th of 2020. The more than 18 months of not wearing a tie, maybe more than 18 months, 19, 20, I don't know. And therefore, I wanted her to capture that image. And it was kind of dark, and she said to me, I'm worried it's dark. I said, don't worry. And this is not about me. This is about people who know how to be photographed. I knew how to bring light to the picture, if you know what I mean. And she looked at the picture after, and she said, this is not what I saw through the viewfinder. And I said, but I was bringing to the picture as well. And she said, I've never thought about it that way. She said, I routinely take so many millions of photographs, and film videos and so on. And it's about getting the existing light, not the person within. And it's a very different kind of work she does than what you do. But I've noticed in every photograph of yours that I've seen that there is a light that is not just studio light. It is the light of the person you're photographing. And that's what has drawn me to your work very specifically, as opposed to, there are many other photographers I admire who photograph musicians and actors and artists. I'm not saying you're the only one, but your work to me is quite different, which is why you're on the show today and not someone else.
Oh, well, thank you. Don't I feel special? No, it's really interesting what you're saying there, because you talk about that you're bringing a light, because what I actively do is, a lot of artists will say, I'm nervous about posing, or I'm nervous about these things. And I'll keep saying, the reason we have a hair and makeup artist there on the day is so you don't have to think. You don't have to care. We are responsible for every pose we put you in. It is our job to get the image out of you, not yours. And that is something we really hammer into everyone that we're working with. But what's really interesting is that my thinking around all of that is that when you get people back to nothing, that moment when everything's down, that's when you get everything. It's all the defenses, like, when you come away from a shoot, I've never walked away from a shoot not liking the person that I photographed. And people always ask, like, oh God, tell me a nightmare story, tell me, and I'm like, but there isn't one regarding the artist. Something may have happened, or something, that we would have worked out or whatever. But the artists themselves, the second you get the defenses out of the way, we're all good people. I think that's the really weird thing, the philosophical side of photography, with portrait photography in particular. It's the defenses that make us difficult to deal with, but the second everything just strips back, you can feel it that second. And it's like, for me, it almost feels like a earth moving thing. And I know exactly when it's happening. And then that's the moment to take the shot, and you can really miss it, so it's interesting how what you're doing as a subject, and we're all trying to achieve the same thing, but the different ways of going about it and the different headspaces you need to be in. But I think with portrait photography in particular, you really need to be very aware and empathetic towards the person you're taking the picture of, and knowing really clearly what they want and what they want to communicate.
Let's say you're hired by an opera company to photograph one of their singers or one of their executives. And when you photograph an executive, he or she may have a very different intention about what they want to communicate in their image than might the singer. And because it's the opera company that's paying your bill and your income, you have agreed in effect to give them what they're after. How do you find the middle ground between doing that stuffy executive shot that we see so often with many heads of arts companies where they're like this, and the kind of Fran Marshall shot that we want, because that's what we're hiring Fran Marshall?
Again, very nice and very complimentary. Thank you so much. I think
we're just going to dispense right now. You don't have to say thank you.
I'm the same color as my top. No, the commonality amongst every photograph that we take is that we are showcasing the capability of the person. So whether you are a leading soprano on the Met stage, or you are the head of the Etta Parker program in the Royal Opera House, or whatever's going on, you are showcasing capability. And it's just very simply a look in the eye, and it's, you don't have to create the boxed, passport shot, because if anything, I think that does the opposite. And an artistic organization, I feel, should be very passionate about creating portraits of their execs that show them to be somewhat interesting people, because they're going to be working in one of the most interesting spaces. so the balance for me in that situation that you just gave me in my case study is showcasing the artistry in the person who happens to be sitting behind the desk, who's making the really big decisions that's allowing the art to happen. And yeah, we've done that a lot, and I love it. I love photographing artistic administrators because they generally have a really strong musical background, and they made that decision to stop it and move in, and I can totally sympathize with that. And then they're staying within the arts world, and they're trying to find that passion within the administration, which can be really difficult, and it's a totally different skill set that they need, but they're the ones behind the scenes actually making it happen. So I really get excited. Like, I love photographing agents, PR teams.
What was that you said?
Stop it. Do my Irish accent. I get persecuted for that here. PR here in the UK. But
Public
PR
relations.
in our, yeah, they say PR what? I'm like, oh God, public relations teams. Because they're the bloodline. They're the ones who bring in the audience. And yeah, like, you know what I mean? I absolutely love working with administrators in that space, because they're so fascinating. And they're always just really interesting people, and they always have a really good story. So yeah, I really enjoy that work too.
But there's another element I'll add, and I'm speaking from personal experience, but I know it's not unique to me. I'm often asked, very often asked, to provide a photograph. If I'm making an appearance, if I've written an article, if I am part of a symposium. And I tend to find that the people asking for the photograph have very much in mind the kind of photograph they want. So that I have several current Fred photographs. I'm not one of those people who send out their photos from 15 years ago, which I've seen very often. And then you meet the person and you think they're either retouching their photos or not having a good day. But mine are contemporary, but I have the photograph that, let's call it the executive professional photograph. And my insistence was that I have a very rich, dark, sort of burgundy red behind me instead of the grays and the beiges and so on, because that's the person I am. I'm not a passive, shy person. But it's in a black jacket, and it's a rather formal tie, and a smile that may not be as exuberant as my typical one. It's a more muted smile. And I really I couldn't say money. I had to sort of say, yes, sort of in a Katharine Hepburn kind of yes, to keep the mouth together. And then I have the very extroverted photographs that people in certain places like and prefer. But that would be if I'm making an appearance somewhere and you want to sell tickets, and here's this friendly person that you're going to come see. I send that photo. Then there frankly are the passport kind of photos. I recently had to get a document and give a photo, and I went to a local photo shop, and for $20 he did a couple of photos, and he did it behind a beige background, and he said, "How come you're smiling?" And I said, "Well, because this is the image I want to project." And he said, "People don't smile, they're petrified." And I said, "I'm not." I said, "But I want that my documents stand out. If people are going through 30 documents and they have to select one, let it be mine." And in the working world, especially in America, I can't speak for elsewhere, although I've certainly seen business cards from Scandinavia and Northern Europe where you have very somber looking people, and also China, Japan, and so on, where their images are on their business cards. I would want my image to communicate me and not what the people want me to be. And yet there is that demand, and I recognize it, and I try to go halfway and present an image that will be part of what they're looking for, but also that it be me. And because in our modern world, this imagery circulates everywhere before we arrive. People form their opinions about who the guest is, the speaker, the host, the potential employee, based on that imagery.
Absolutely.
And I'm asked to reel back the imagery sometime, and I just won't do it.
Well, I think you have a brand to put forward.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm saying, are you asked when you're creating a photo to create something for the context of the photo?
Yes. I suppose there's a difference between functional photography. If that's, what category does it sit in under, actually, passport photography? I'm not sure. But I think generally we would always sort of argue when it comes to creating the imagery that people are putting forward for an audition panel or whatever, we'll say, you know, it's just about capturing you. You know what I mean? It can be a very simple image, but there will we always provide a very wide variety within a full day shoot. So people will get everything they need, and we'll make sure that we're box ticking through the day. So that they have what they need. Would any of them work for a passport? Probably not, because we do a certain amount of editing and that's illegal. But yeah, no, like I was devastated to give up my last passport because I'm roaring laughing in the photograph because one of my friends got in the machine thing with me at the same time and just ruined it, and I'm roaring laughing, and I was so pressurized to send it off. I had to send it off. So I had this passport for 10 years of me roaring laughing, and then I had to get my new one, and now I look like a serial killer. It's dreadful. So I was really sad to let that one go, but I was so surprised they approved it. But yeah, I think but you're going in as the personality of the job, you know, like that's so important to what you do. And you're interviewing people, and it's like, you know, in you know, and you're so international that your image is really important. I think, like, for the sort of technical passport stuff and documents, I think it does have to sort of fit the rules. And like,
but that was a one-off. But I meant in general that most of the imagery of me, I'm just using me as an example, but everyone who does what we do, that I know there's only one Fred Plotkin, but there are Fred Plotkins that people want, that may be the eater, the food guy, the Italian guy, the music guy, the theater guy, the writer, and suddenly with the writer they want me to look more intellectual than I am.
The next time I'm in New York, we're doing a full day, and I can't wait. I want you to bring a variety of hats.
Scarves, not only the hats, the scarves.
We'll nail it.
But I guess the foundational question here is, there's an expectation from the opera company, from the arts institution, from the commissioner, the person who commissions it, that it work in certain ways. And to what degree do you do that while also, and I'm going to use your full name, make it a Francis Marshall original? Because I know your photographs when I see them. And it's not that you only have one style, and it's not that I recognize it because, you know, it's a Mondrian and there are boxes. I recognize it because of the energy, because of the light, because of the usual sense of contentment and ease that you see in the subject. And these are very different from a lot of other comparable works by other photographers who are shooting musicians and artists and creative people.
Can I say thank you again?
No.
This is the bit I was saying this earlier about opera and classical music having a brand. So it's all I've ever shot, and I honestly don't know how I can tell you when I look at the image and we're like, yes, this will work, this might not, this, you know, because it's constantly that fine balance between, are we seeing the person here, and are they ticking the classical music and opera box? And I can't even put into words what that box means in a descriptor, but it is so different to working with a jazz musician, working with a pop musician or a band, you know, and I've done some of that work, and it looks so different. The energy is so different. So yeah, like, I think there is that sort of respect that has to happen. I do think opera and classical music has an obligation to be a little bit more open to artists, you know, really being themselves. But that's what social media has done now, because you've got this absolute like wheelbarrow of Instagram accounts coming out from singers of all ages all around the world who are presenting themselves in their true authentic self, and it's really challenging the industry, and I think it's fantastic. And it's adding this whole level of humor and artists taking this, you know, much more authority and authenticity on their own career. If they haven't got an agent or whatever, that's not stopping them. You know what I mean? And I think that is really fascinating, that whole movement that's happening now, that you've definitely seen in the last 5 years, I'd say. And that is making the theaters really say, okay, well, actually, who do we want on stage? What represents our message? And it's, I think there's a real flip now to the theater thinking, are we presenting how we want to present? But I think that's because of the younger artists that are coming up, because I'm telling you, like, we've worked with some, you know, singers now in their early 20s. They look a lot different. Like, there's a different energy. There is just a different energy. They know what they're doing, and it's very much full steam ahead, you know, and I would not be getting in their way, and I wouldn't like them coming up behind me, you know, because it's fantastic. And I think that what you're talking about there is what's the expectation of what the image look like. That needs to be really challenged. And we love that, you know, we love just sort of really finding people and finding artists of all different passions that really fall in love with opera and classical music, and seeing how we can present them, you know, in an authentic way.
How does the decision happen as to whether the picture is in black and white or color?
Generally, if there's too much going on in the image and there's something distracting from the artist, and if I can't get rid of it, we'll go black and white, because I want to, that's a general rule, it's not always the case, but I want to simplify the image. So for stage work, you'd never do it, but for portraits, absolutely. Just if there's too much going on, and it can be anything, you know what I mean? It can be too much going on from the shoulders up. It can be too much going on from a full landscape image or whatever. But yeah, it's not a hard and fast rule, but generally it's what I'll go to if I feel distracted. I want my eye to land and then move. That's generally the formula that we use.
Part of why I ask is when I've been involved in casting, we receive photographs, mountains of photographs of artists, of singers, and sometimes actors, and usually they're in black and white. And usually they look very posed, and usually if it's a writer, they have a hand here. If it's a conductor, they're holding a baton. If it's an instrumentalist, they're holding their instrument, unless it's a piano, in which case you might have the piano lid behind them. There are these tropes that I see all the time, and it doesn't distract, but it doesn't add. I don't notice the baton. I don't notice the scroll of the violin. They have their heads tipped at certain angles. It's kind of like when you see wedding pictures, the photographer says, okay, everybody lined up, turn to your left, turn to your right, look at me, smile. And many of these pictures are so interchangeable. And frankly, when they arrive in black and white, a little indistinguishable, because whatever the traits are that they may have, like blue eyes or brown hair, whatever they have, is lost in the black and white. And if I'm casting someone, I want to know what they look like in color.
But you're forgetting that it's a lot cheaper to print in black and white.
I know that. I know that. But, you know, I remember when I was first starting out and I had my black and white pictures, and I'll send them to you sometime and I'll tell you about the photographer. We'll talk about her later, actually. But my black and whites, I kind of insisted that it be unmistakably Fred Plotkin, whatever that is. But I didn't want it to look like every other picture that I received. And it's a challenge standing out, so to speak, when you're applying for work, if frankly your photos look like everyone else. So I'm going to start naming people. I don't know if you've ever met a wonderful baritone, an American named Andrew Garland.
No.
I call him Andy. And Andy is a wonderful singer, and he has he looks Irish or Scottish. He has curly red hair. And if you were to see a black and white of Andy, you would never know that he has this curly red hair. And frankly, when you see it in color, you suddenly picture him in certain kinds of roles, whether it's Billy Budd or the Commedia dell'arte players in Ariadne of Naxos. You picture him more that way than you ever could seeing a black and white of this nice looking man, but without the distinguishing characteristic, which are his red curls. I think now that artists, and most everybody, though not me yet, have beautiful websites, you can see the color on the websites. When you photograph working with people, do you say to them, will this be a shot that you will display? Will it be a website picture? Does that come up?
Well, we generally are designing the website and branding for the artist when we work with them. So if we are working with them in that way, we create the whole brand before we do the shoot. And then we do the shoot and make sure that there's a huge connective flow. So Sophie's background is mainstream branding and design, and she's a brand specialist. So that's all her area that is coming into play. And I love that her background is mainstream because it means that she just has such a wider knowledge, and she's bringing that background in. So then we can sort of provide the full spectrum, when we're working with people. So yeah, they are very much connected, but there's a whole psychology around colors, and it will all be reflected in what they're trying to communicate. And as well, and geography plays a big part as well, between American artists or European based artists. And again, there's no hard and fast rules, but you just know what works when you see it. So yeah, I think sending a black and white image for an audition isn't the best thing to do. I've never sat in a car, and that's not my place. It's not where I sit. But I think to make that impression, it's good to really show yourself, in your closest thing to what you look like when you're not in the room. But we find that the website is the new sort of audition space, and there's a huge amount of improved sort of sophistication in how artists are sharing themselves. They'll send maybe a branded PDF in advance that is designed within their branding, with a collection of imagery, so you can see them in many different capacities or whatever, on stage, off stage, as portraits. And that, I think, needs to be jumped up a little bit, because it's all about standing out. You can be the best singer in the world if you're in your bedroom, but no one's going to know unless you're able to push yourself out there. So yeah, unfortunately, that is the case.
You can be the best singer in the world if you're in your bedroom.
Yes.
That gives me hope.
But that's the thing, yeah.
So a question that's a little delicate, but I think it's important to acknowledge, is when you're photographing people in color or black and white, but especially in color, people are all different colors.
Mm-hmm.
And what has to be done differently in terms of either lighting or angles? Maybe the angle is also about the shape of the cheekbones, or the jaw, I don't know. To bring out the best.
No, it's not a thing. No, we photograph people as they are. You know what I mean? It's my responsibility to make sure people are lit perfectly, and and that's a really big part of what we do. But that's something I never even think about that really. But it's just all about making sure that everybody, what you're seeing in front of you is the exact same as what you're seeing on it's color correction with the camera, that it's matching what I'm looking at all the time. And that's the most important thing. I suppose it's sort of a scientific measurement, I suppose, more than anything else.
So in that regard, what about makeup?
Makeup that we do, it's funny, people say I want to have a natural look, and I always say, well, you'd be really surprised at how much makeup it takes to look natural. But yeah, it's that purely is because when you're working as close to the face as we are, it's just that even skin tone that everyone wants. And the other aspect is that if you have spots or blemishes on the day, you know, maybe you don't want them forever. You know, you're gonna be looking at these images the next 5 years, and maybe that spot did not need to be there for the rest of that time.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that's temporary, we'll always make sure is gone. But you know, anything that's permanent, like a, you know, a mole or something like that, I think that's really important to showcase on the face. Like we never alter people to a point, you know, it's very light editing that we do. And the makeup is always very natural and turned up. We never use stage level makeup. It's just basically to work with the lights, because if you put studio lights on anybody, they're going to look very odd without makeup. The makeup is to bring them back to where they are, you know, is really what we're doing.
Have you ever done food photography?
No, I haven't. I tried a little bit.
Yeah,
yes.
And
if there's not a person in the room, I will take the worst photograph of all time. You'd be better off. My new puppy would take a better picture with my phone than me. It's unbelievable. If there's not a human being in the picture, I can't do anything. Nothing.
You have a puppy there?
She's at Sophie's taking her for a walk along the mountains,
okay.
The hills.
When she comes back?
There's no way she's coming in.
Okay.
She's enormous. We bought her, she was this size. She's now this size.
I've had many of my guests have their dogs and cats and birds and so on appear on the show. So that's fine.
I have 2 cats and a dog. It's a madhouse. Anyway, go on.
The reason I asked about food photography, you know that I've written 6 cookbooks, and each production, and they are productions like opera productions of a book, involves design and visual. And I've worked with some food photographers I think are wonderful, and a couple I think are just awful. But what people don't know about food photography is the food has to go into makeup, so to speak.
Oh, it's like the most specialized type of photography out there. And yeah, I've never, like, I know exactly what's involved in it, which is why I've never touched it.
So for example, I'm often asked to cook 3 versions of the same dish. One will be photographed in its natural state, but the other 2 will be adulterated for the photograph. And when I was making spaghetti and put on a little tomato sauce for one of my books, they tossed the spaghetti in mineral oil to give it a sheen. And people come in and they think, wow, great free food. And they start to reach for the samples. And I say, you can't eat that. It's covered with mineral oil, or it's covered with brown shavings, mabox or whatever. And I find it so revolting. What I really don't like about it is it doesn't resemble the food. It resembles what the photographer wants the food to look like.
But the food will not photograph the way you want it to unless you do those awful things to it. And that is why I hate it, because it makes me feel physically sick to do what they do.
What I do now is, because people follow me in social media and they want to know what I'm cooking and often want a recipe, I have a little light that cost about $3 that I got actually from my mother as a reading light when the room is dark. And I put it on the dining table, and I put down a simple towel, usually just one color, and the plate, and I arc the light over so that the food is well lit, and I shoot it from different angles. And that's it. And I put these pictures out on the internet, wherever, and they look like the way it's supposed to look. And that's what I want people to experience with not only my food, but other food, because otherwise my food or the food of Italy has been taken and filtered through what the photographer wants it to look like. And it often bears no resemblance. And there's one book of mine, I won't say which one, but I hate the photography in it because it's about photo shoots and not about food. And the food looks unappealing to me.
Well, there's the food, there's a whole art form in the stylist. Like I did sit in a workshop once around food photography, and they were using mashed potato instead of ice cream, and they were mixing fairy liquid, like washing up liquid, into the pasta sauce, which would make you die. But yeah, it is an absolute art form. You know, it really is. And it's generally a photographer partnered with a food stylist. And it's just a completely different thing. It's a completely different job. And I I have huge respect for it when I see it done really well. But there's amazing work, especially like I'm sure you're seeing it in New York, but in London with the amount of restaurants, like it's the most amazing city for restaurants. And the photography that's coming out now because of social media and the Instagram accounts, like it's phenomenal how amazing food can be photographed. And a lot of it seems to be done with natural light, which I think is fantastic. People shooting the entire menu, and it's really good because that's what's going to get people in, isn't it?
The hardest thing to photograph in the food world, I defy anyone to come up with something more difficult. Banana ice cream. Because real banana ice cream is not yellow, it's sort of a gray. Because if you mash a banana, that's what you get. And the really delicious banana ice cream will be that gray. And because ice cream melts, so you can't have lighting because the ice cream will go in moments. So either you have to photograph it in a chilled space and with the scoop and so on, but then it doesn't necessarily look good. Banana ice cream, and even photographing bananas without their skins with the ice cream does not look good at all. So my project for you is get banana ice cream, assuming you like it, and play with that at home. And once you're good at photographing banana ice cream, you can do anything in the
I can do anything.
Yeah, in the food world. Have you done journalism, action photography?
Everything I've done really has been in music. So yeah, I've shot operas. I shoot operas, concerts, recording sessions, do a lot of that work. And then those images tend to end up in the press. But yeah, no, it's generally that sort of work, unless I'm doing some private collection, but then I generally don't send them to press because I'm sort of doing those as a passion project. But yeah, like a lot of action work, but it's generally for stage, and working with some of the really exciting theaters here. And it's amazing. Like I love the diversification of the job, like that I can go and shoot an opera one day and then be shooting a portrait, doing a portrait shoot the following day. And it's just really, it keeps the brain fresh, so that's something that I really enjoy doing. But yeah, I suppose that would be the closest thing to that.
When I worked at the Metropolitan Opera, we would have final dress rehearsals, and photographers would be allowed in if they were pre-approved, and they tended to line up in about 12 or 13 rows back from the orchestra pit.
Yeah.
And set everything in place and stand there and snap back in the film times. And one of the photographers was named James Heffernan, and James Heffernan was the Met's official photographer. And I forget the name of the woman who worked with him, who at a certain point when he became more frail, she in effect did these.
Is it Marty Saul?
No.
Okay.
But I can picture her, but I'm forgetting her name. It's 35 years. And she and he would do these very studied shots, and they would have a Metropolitan Opera insignia on the side and often printed underneath the name of the artist. And at that time, ancient history, you'd give the photograph to a member of the media who would then take it to the newspaper, the magazine, and the picture would be transformed into the publication. Now, of course, you just send a PDF. But there was another wonderful photographer who is still with us. Her name is Beth Bergman. I don't know if you know her work.
No, I haven't met
Beth was the you of then, so to speak. Your approaches and styles are very different. She worked a lot in black and white. Beth, now that a lot of the singers from that era are dying, recently there was Teresa Zylskauer, the Polish singer, Beth will publish pictures that she took 40, 45, 50 years ago of these people. And her photography is beautiful, but a very different aesthetic from yours because the requirements and the taste of that time were different. And then there was a person who, she would be your wicked Austrian or German great grandmother or great aunt, whose name was Erica Davidson. And Erica was a refugee from somewhere in Europe, and she was very talkative.
Mm-hmm.
But her particular thing was she would say something such as, the light is beautiful. Yeah, yeah, that's right. And Erica would always say, yeah, yeah, that's right, agreeing with herself, which had the effect of making people very jumpy, because you'd think that she was talking to you, but then she would say, move a little to the right and smile. Yeah, yeah, that's right. And Erica did my official Met portrait of all those years ago. And she understood about me that I did not want it to be like all the others. And Erica was flexible enough that she could capture people, and she was very good. She was excellent. But and she photographed a lot for Opera News. But she was so high maintenance, a lot more than the divas, that you had to know what you were getting with Erica Davidson. And then was his name Christian Steiner, a very famous photographer who did all these very formal shots of Sutherland in her gowns and hair and so on. And they're wonderful, but they were different from what you were talking about, of not wanting them in costume and character and so on. And I'm not criticizing these people from the past, and thankfully Beth Bergman is still with us, but the aesthetic is so very different. And what caught my eye about you before getting to know you and your let's call it a lively personality, the very different from Erica Davidson, that you were bringing these people forward as they are, as the people I knew. For example, I'm a friend and colleague of Thomas Hampson and Luca Pizzaroni, and you've shot both of them. Yeah. Your pictures come the closest to those guys that I know, rather than the good-looking men or the bass baritones or whatever we're talking about. You actually captured them. And Frederica von Stade and her special personality, because von Stade sat for all these photographers I mentioned. She's older than I am by a few years, so that she knew James Heffernan and Erica Davidson and Christian Steiner and all those people. And yet your von Stade, no doubt, is quite different. Talk about photographing someone who is, number one, so lovely, but also so accustomed to being photographed like von Stade.
Well, it's all about the circumstance. So I photographed Flicka when we were in Jay Keggy's home in San Francisco.
Composer. Yeah.
Yes. And it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life, because I was, I was so terrified to meet her, because I've always listened to her. I think she's absolutely legendary. I love Jay Keggy. It was this double whammy of wow, at the same time. And the wonderful thing about Jay Keggy is that he's so humble, and he's very communicative about who is responsible for his career and who he's grateful for. And Flicka is probably the main person that he really attributes that to. And to see the two of them in the room together, I just knew it was going to be a nice day. But the second you meet her, it's just the most disarming kindness, niceness. You completely forget who she is. And of course, I mean that in the most respectful ways. You just completely forget the legend that is in front of you because of the niceness. And I know you can say that as well, because she's just so profoundly down to earth. So it was just so easy, and we spoke for hours, and we photographed both of them together and individually, and it was just so beautiful, and it was a really, really lovely day. It really sticks in my mind. But yeah, you can become so nervous about meeting somebody at that level that I'm just like, okay, well, make sure that I can keep my that I'm still remembering what I meant to be doing there. I'm not going to sit there fangirling, but it is that sort of pressure that, can I turn on when I feel that excited about it? And yeah, she's lovely. But you see, the thing is that Frederica von Stade and another artist who's like this is Ormanella Yaho. They are so profoundly gifted.
Albanian soprano.
Oh,
Yeah.
Like, they are so profoundly gifted at bringing out the best in people in the room. They walk into the room and everybody is elevated. And it is a unique gift. I don't know what creates it. I don't know what causes it, but I've seen it a few times in my life, and just coming, I'm sure there's other people, but what really is, those two singers do it big time. And
Leontine Price has that gift
I'd say
in
so.
massive amount.
Wow.
Yeah.
I just wonder what that is. It
More
is
than
like
anyone I've ever known. And
I
I
really think you
really
have to
know
be
and love
born
one
with it.
style, but Leontine
Yeah,
Price
really.
does that with everyone.
Yeah. Oh,
Remarkable.
well, I envy you that, because that like, she's absolutely incredible. But yeah, I don't know what that characteristic is called, but it's so profound when you feel it and see it. And yeah, it's that sort of that gets you through. It gets you through the nervousness. But like, I felt like that a good few times. You know, I have had the amazing experience of working with my heroes. You know, like people who I've really looked up to, and I have to pinch myself that happened.
Name one or two.
Oh, well, like the shoot you just mentioned, Thomas Sampson, Luca Pizzaroni in the same day. Like that, like like I had just moved to London about 5 years ago. I immigrated 5 years ago, and we were sort of setting up the business, and I had met with the wonderful Jenna Wolf, that you know from Lenny Studio. And out of the blue, I get this call from Kate Pizzaroni saying, I need 3 shoots from you next week. Can you fly to Milan? And the 3 shoots were Eileen Perez, Luca Pizzaroni, and Thomas Hampson. And I had 2 days to get the 2 shoots done. And it was like, it was just, I wasn't shooting at that level yet. You know, that's all I can say. And suddenly I was, and I had a week to sort of get my head around what was happening, and all of my dreams were coming through, like, in a very, very short amount of time. And it was the most amazing experience. It really, really was. And they're like, Tom and Luca are amazing people. They're hilarious, and Eileen is just off the charts. You know what I mean? I've shot her a few times, and you know, it's there's such a difference when you know that you're working with people at that level, that they know exactly who they are, and it's so easy to photograph them because they know it. Like, you know what I mean? It's really, really lovely.
I don't know if you heard, but very recently in San Francisco, Eileen Perez was singing her first Toscas.
Yes.
And in the cast also was Solomon Howard, who's been her boyfriend for a while, and he was playing Angelotti.
Yes.
And at the end of the last performance of the run, he came out on stage and knelt down and proposed marriage to her. She had no idea.
I didn't see that.
And she accepted, and we think she accepted. The crowd cheered. And he picked her up, and there's a famous image now that you can find of, he's very tall.
Oh my goodness.
Lifting her up, and her feet sort of kicking with happiness and so on. It's a great moment in opera. I wish I happened to be there. So I just sort of something, not necessarily related to Eileen Perez and Thomas Hampson, Luca Pizzaroni, all of whom are really good looking people in addition to all of their other attributes. I know a woman, she's not in our profession, who is one of the most beautiful women you will ever see. She looks sort of like 80% Jacqueline Kennedy, 20% Cindy Crawford. And she has a terrific figure and a lovely personality, and gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. And I, a couple of times, said, I'd love to take your picture. And she said, I want you to know I don't photograph well. And she was not being modest, but she said what turned out to be the truth. And she showed me pictures of herself. And I tried, I'm an okay photographer, I'm not you, but she does not photograph well. Have you ever encountered that kind of thing, whether the person is very good looking or maybe not, where they don't photograph well?
No.
Okay.
That's not me being arrogant. That's I really try to deconstruct that idea of someone thinking that they photograph well, because if they don't photograph well, it is, and I will 100% say this, the photographer's fault. It is the blame of the photographer, because there's so much pressure put on an artist to perform in front of a photograph that I just think it's awful. Like, I've had many artists work with us who said, I had a dreadful shoot a couple of years ago and I'm still traumatized by it. And I'll say, okay, well, what happened? And it's like, well, they just kept telling me that it wasn't working. And I'm like, but it's their job to make sure that it's working. It's their job to make you feel like it's working. So if you deconstruct that, I promise you with that person, there will be a situation that happened in the past that told her that she doesn't look great in photographs. So then she never feels comfortable in a photograph, which means she might be producing images that she doesn't like of herself. And that's we all, the usual thing is like, oh, well, please get me from my right side because I don't like my left side. I'm like, there's no such thing as a bad side. No such thing. We're constantly.
Although there have been actors who only are photographed. I have an opera singer friend, I won't name him. He's very, very handsome, but he has decided that he only looks good on the left side.
Yeah.
And every picture you see of him, you see the left side of his face. The right side is good looking too, but he has come to believe that the way the light hits the jaw and the cheekbones and the eye, that he only looks good on the left.
Yeah.
And even in opera productions, he'll say, can I be on this side of her when I sing to her? Because I look better over here. In the case of the woman I mentioned, she's not in any way in the arts. She's not a performer. She's a private individual. And I don't want to push her about this because she is one of the most beautiful women. Maybe I'll have to send you to Italy to meet her, and you can cure her of that belief that she can't be photographed.
I would dedicate the rest of my life to curing people from that. I really would, because it's something I get really passionate about. I don't care what their background is or what they're doing. It's like, it's just that it is the photographer's responsibility, and it always gets well, I've just seen it a lot of the times get passed on to the artist, and it's cruel. You're letting people, and as well, it's so objectifying to treat people like that. It's not humane. And I know there's a lot of bigger things happening in the world and getting annoyed about that, but I think everyone has the right to feel beautiful in their own way, and there's just no such thing as this someone's really attractive, someone's not. It's bullshit. It's everyone has this
how do you say that in Irish?
Bullshit.
Not shite.
Shite, bullshit. It is something that is really important, because we all go through that phase of absolute self-loathing, and it's not really spoken about. But I'll see the most confident people that I know, and then they'll start speaking about how they feel that they view themselves, and it's just so sad. I think it's awful, and it's generally done because of imagery or because of unrealistic filters that are being put on images, which I cannot stand. And it is just really about communicating people's inner beauty. This may sound very cliche, but it is that what I'm always trying to do, and everybody can look amazing. Like, I really do believe that everyone can look absolutely amazing. And I absolutely love, and I hope that, I do make people feel that way, and that we make people feel that way when working with them, because we want them to feel wonderful when they're working with us.
So would you consider photographing non-musicians, non-performers?
Well, I photograph a lot of composers.
Well, I mean, people not in the arts.
Not in the arts. Yeah. Absolutely.
Because what you said is really very relevant. As I said to you at the beginning, my approach is take as many pictures as you want, because one of them will be good.
Yeah.
Which is, I suppose, another way of saying the same thing. That, if you put 1,000 monkeys in front of a typewriter, one of them will type out Hamlet. But for those young listeners, the typewriter was a piece of equipment we used to use before personal computers.
Yes, absolutely.
But I think it's very important. There is, and we're going off in a direction I didn't plan. There are photographers who take pictures of people who have had cancer or other afflictions or challenges in a way that shows their strength and beauty. And not for the purpose of the photographer necessarily, although she might want to do that as a collection, but for the person being photographed. And I think what you said is very affirming. And you and I have never discussed this topic, but I think that photography can serve to make people feel better about themselves. I never really thought about it that way, but it's an important element.
Well, it's like I've always said, that it is a huge honor. And again, this may sound very cliche, I apologize in advance, but it's a huge honor for somebody to ask us to take their portrait, because it is just the most vulnerable thing you can do. Even if it's just a standard portrait, it's frightening, it's scary, and there's a huge element of trust in that. And I really do respect that trust is being put upon us, that we are being chosen to do that shot for the artist or whoever is asking us to take their picture. And I think for performers who are getting up on stage in general, there is a huge pressure on how they look and what are they wearing and all that sort of thing. And I just hate it. I think the act of anybody making any sort of comment on how anybody looks is just like ridiculous. Like, it's just an absolute joke. So yeah, I do feel that imagery, and especially if you're post-op after a surgery of any sort where you've had some sort of physical change to your body, photography can be extremely empowering, but with the right photographer, because you have to understand what's happening and the vulnerability of that, and it's just something to be respected. It's not voyeurism, it's empowerment. And thinking about it like that and just having that respectful tone the whole time, I think that's really, really important.
It's been quite a while since I've read the writings of Susan Sontag, like 30 years, but two of her most famous books were on photography,
yes,
and on illness.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't recall whether there was any intersection in those books, one about the other. I would have to go back and read them now, but what we're talking about,
I have them up on my shelf here, just looking at them.
Yeah, it would be an interesting thing to read those books together and try to imagine what we're talking about now. I think that there is famous photography and portraiture and painting from the past of people, this is getting gruesome, but the dead and the dying. And that's a whole genre that we don't see too much anymore. The last time we've seen it, I forget his name, but there was an American photographer who had AIDS in the 1980s, and he did a series of self-portraits to document what AIDS and HIV were and are, at a time when there was no medicine for it whatsoever, and at a time when people with AIDS were completely reviled and had no legal rights and such. And it was a very dramatic series of works of art about illness. And I really didn't intend to go in this direction, but here we are.
Photography is about everything, though.
Photography really is about everything. There's someone I wanted to ask you about who you photographed, who I knew, not as well as you knew her, who died in, I believe, April or May of 2021, whose name was Veronica Dunn. And I've had other Irish guests on this program, including Deborah Kelleher, president of the Royal Irish Academy of Music, Tara Aroth, the mezzo-soprano Irish who studied with her, and Conor Hanratty, the stage director. And Veronica Dunn was known as Ronnie Dunn.
Yeah.
And she was well into her 90s and taught and worked very hard. And she, like you and like Isolde, was a strong Irish woman. And what's it like, number one, that she is a hero and a legend, literally, but also a woman of great energy and humor, but also no nonsense. She was very direct with singers and with anyone. Talk about photographing Veronica Dunn.
Like, you see, I haven't been home in 19 months because of lockdown, and it's really weird to think of what's changed. And with the passing of Veronica Dunn, the opera world in Ireland is profoundly changed. There's nobody that worked in the area that didn't know her. And her legacy is absolutely phenomenal. Like we did the rebrand and website for the Veronica Dunn singing competition. So we're acutely aware of her reach internationally. And this is just as a teacher. This is not even mentioning her performing career, which was, miraculous and what she achieved.
You
really
sang with Maria Callas.
I know.
Yeah.
Like, is there and same sort of situation when we talked about Frederica von Stade, is that I grew up adoring Ronnie. Like, she was a legend. And what was really interesting is that, a lot of the times classical music and opera can seem very much in its own box, whereas everybody knew who Ronnie was in Ireland. Like anyone from any sort of background, people would know who she was because she managed to crack into mainstream media. And she was just an absolute national treasure. And the thing about Ronnie is that she never wasted time. Mm-hmm. So my shoot with her, I did her portraits a few times, just over the years, and I just grab her, and we just go and take some pictures in the National Concert Hall, wherever we were, because I knew what she was, and I always wanted to make sure that I had her photograph, because she just meant an awful lot to me as somebody who had really pushed the country in amazing directions. Like, she brought incredible standards into the country. The competition is phenomenal with the jury that they bring in, and the opportunities it created for artists all through the country. Photographing her was like, it was such a gift, and again, you walk into the room and you're all, like, even when I knew her very well at this point, she'd come over and she'd say something absolutely hilarious in your ear, and you wouldn't be able to move then. Like, you'd be completely paralyzed because she'd have just said something extremely inappropriate or whatever, and you would just be roaring laughing. But she just didn't waste time, and I feel like with her every day, like, I have so many friends who were her students, and they all moved in with her. They all lived with her, like it was such like an all-time 24/7 situation of nurturing, and I haven't seen anything like it. And she was like, there'd never be anyone else like her. And yeah, like, it's just very strange, the amount that's changed.
What's very impressive is that the Deborah Kelleher at the Royal Irish Academy of Music and others there, but especially Deborah, had the idea that the Veronica Dunn method should be taught to other singing teachers in Ireland, so that when the day did come, and we never thought it would, but it did, that Ronnie was no longer around, there are the people who teach the way she taught, not with the quite same verve and humor that you were talking about, and physicality, because she came from a time when you could touch anyone anywhere in the interest of producing better singing, and she did, and she would. But nonetheless, her tradition and her methods and her viewpoint are carried on, because I think it's a very important thing that great artists teach other people to teach. Not only to perform, but to teach. And
it's also the nurturing. I think it's more the being aware that it's not just about you. It's about a nurturing and continuation of this art form, which is a couple of 100 years old. And how do you really nurture it? So, like, you've got superstars like Tara Roth, who are, constantly talking about the wonders of Ronnie's method. And you can see it in Tara. You can see it in so many singers in the country who went to her, who did extremely well. And like, it's about nurturing the legacy and nurturing the artists coming up behind you as well, which is something she just always did. Like, the amount of stories you heard of her teaching people for free who didn't have money, and it was just like, I don't know where she got this endless sort of flow of generosity from, but she was also hilarious. like she was really fun to be with. Like she was so funny. And it's really weird to think that she's not there now. It's very strange to think like that. Because the competition's coming up again.
Yeah.
And it's going to be weird. But yeah.
Can photography be taught? And I don't mean the technicalities of working a camera and the light, but the sensibility that is much of what we've covered today.
Well, I'm self-taught, so all my training is through music. I think if you want to be a portrait photographer, you need to latch on to inspirations. So you mentioned Susan Sontag. Annie Leibovitz is my all-time hero, her partner. And when you spoke about that book, in Grief, there's a book out that actually documented Susan Sontag's final days and the progression of the cancer taken by Annie Leibovitz, and they're probably the most profound images I've ever seen in my life. They're unbelievable. And there's another UK-based photographer, Plotkin, who I love as well, who's, I don't know if you're aware of his work, but he's done most of the political leaders in the world. They're the greatest portraits. They really are absolutely phenomenal. And there's tons of like Diane Arbus and Richard Avedon as well, and they would have been real game changers for me. But I think it is about really understanding who you're photographing. And that I think is a bit more important, because portrait photography is a lot different to landscape. It's a lot different to food photography. It really is about listening and being really sort of keyed into who is in front of the camera. And I've really followed artists who nail that. And they're like, I've mentioned Annie Leibovitz already, but like, there's not a book she's released that I don't have, that I haven't gone through 100 times, studied it, looked at what is she communicating here. And she can photograph someone on the street at the same level that she'd shoot Rihanna, and it's an incredible gift that she has. And I think she's absolutely amazing. But yeah, I think it's about really being inspired and just studying it in every level that you can. Like, I'm obsessive the way I learn about different photographers and how they work. But I think the most important thing is with portraits, it is all about the person in front of you. It's not about you. It's not about your stamp on them. It's about the moment that you catch them in, your experience with them, and trying to communicate what that is. And that's sort of what it's really all about for me.
But there are photographers and painters who have their recognizable style, their signature moment or image, or the painters who will always have a particular vase in the painting, or the photographer who will have a plant or something, just where the photographer always says, "It's me again, here I am," with William Wegman, for example, with his dogs. And I love dogs, but to dress up dogs as ballerinas and so on, to me, it's about the photographer. It's not about the dog in that case.
Yeah.
And as I said, your work, I know it's yours, but there's no signifier that says this is a Fran Marshall photograph, and which is to your credit, I think. But what if you run into someone, a subject, who has very strong notions about how he should look, or she, and what should be in the image? Let's say that a conductor, because conductors can be a bit imperious sometimes, insist that you light them so that they have angular cheeks when they're actually chubby, and the baton be just so, or a crispness to the bow tie that frankly they're not displaying right now. What if they basically try to manage the shoot?
Well, there's a fine line. I think, we wouldn't be in this space if we didn't know how to photograph musicians. So the first thing you'll hear, especially from violinists, is like, oh, I was working with this photographer, they had no respect for the instrument, and they didn't, and that's something that I learned pretty quick. But that's because I sort of not necessarily grew up in the music world, but I worked in the National Concert Hall. I've really had huge experience with watching orchestras move and the respect, and then training as a musician myself. I have huge respect for the instrument. And a lot of artists don't want to be seen holding the instrument in a weird way or something that may not, or in performance, if I'm shooting them on stage, like, oh, don't release that one because, my neck's not quite right, which is why I check with every artist, are you happy? The artist comes first with everything. But I think when someone's trying to, we haven't really had it, to be honest, because I'll always say, like, you have to trust us because you're not seeing what I'm seeing. So a lot of photographers, for example, will shoot with a laptop in the studio. And we don't do it. And we do it very deliberately because I don't want the artist spending the day obsessing about how they look on this computer, because that will inhibit the entire shoot, will inhibit the flow. I'm working towards a goal. I don't have time to explain that. And it's about just trusting us and knowing and say, look, here's our portfolio. If this is what you want, we'll do this with you, but you have to do it our way. And you will feel amazing all through the day, I promise, but you have to let us do our job. But I'll be honest with you, I've never really had to do that. But if the circumstance came up, that's what I'd say.
So I just thought of a question I've never thought to ask until this moment.
Go on.
Many violinists and also violists have a sort of mark on their jaw, which is the result of having, I don't know what that little piece is called on the violin.
The chin rest, yeah.
The chin rest, that they're basically, their cheek is on the chin rest for long times. And I live not too far from the Juilliard School, and I always know who the young musicians are studying violin or viola because of that imprinting there from the chin rest. Would you photograph a string player with that prominently displayed, because that's part of the deal of playing that instrument?
Like, I'm so aware of that, but I've photographed a lot of violinists. It's never come up, but I would think that I would leave it there because that is the ultimate sign, isn't it, that they're a violinist? Yeah, like, how has that not come up? Because it's always something I notice. But like, I've worked with some amazing, like I shot Maxime Vengroff, and I think the mark is there. I'll have to have a look, but I definitely wouldn't be taking it out because that's what shows the work, isn't it? It's like that tiny little signifier.
There's a whole interesting additional series that you could do about Stradivarius's mark, call it, or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Mark.
That's interesting, isn't it?
And just a whole series of portraits of violinists and violists with that.
Yeah.
And to see what that looks like.
Yeah. And who's the artist? Who, like, you know what I mean? Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
Be interesting, wouldn't it? God. Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
Did I leave anything out? Is there anything you wanted to talk about particularly that I did not mention? You've given our listeners wonderful music to go listen to. I do have a question, then you'll tell me.
Go on.
One of the things you list is one of my favorite pieces of music, the Vorspiel, the introductory music to Act 1 of Wagner's Die Walküre.
Yes.
I love that music. And I always thought if I had my own program where music was required to introduce the program before I appear, that would be the music.
Yeah.
What is it about that particular music that you chose it to have among the listings?
Well, it may not be what you want to hear, but I actually play it when I'm running.
Okay.
It's like, it gets my heart pumping. It's like, it's because I love to run. And
it's only about 4.5 minutes.
I know, I don't run that long. But I mix it in with a little bit of Hallelujah Junction, the odd time, and like absolutely everything else, like from my playlists or whatever. But it really gets me ready for whatever is going to happen. And I love it. It's just, there's something about it. Like, I think Wagner is prone to get the blood moving, isn't he, though, in the first, like it's the very first thing you hear.
Initially.
Yeah.
But then, for example, if you're a Fafner in either Rheingold or Siegfried, That can slow down the blood a lot.
Exactly,
Lower
but
the heartbeat.
it's just one of those pieces that has always really jumped out at me. But when we're talking about Thomas Hampson, the Hard Times Come Again No More, which I listed in it, that was my door in to this industry, because that was a CD that was just knocking around my house. And there are artists that, like Renee Fleming as well, is that her jazz album was something that I found when I was 12. And I just absolutely love that. And I didn't know that she was an opera singer when I listened to it first. I was like, oh, she sings opera too. Interesting. I wonder what that sounds like.
So one of the groups you listed, sorry to interrupt, were the King's Singers. So there are 6 of them, if I recall.
Yes.
What's it like from a work point of view, photographing 6 people or a string quartet as opposed to one individual artist?
Well, that we just worked with them recently this year, and it was one of the best shoots of all time. It was absolutely wonderful because I love them. I've always been a huge fan, and they're represented by Intermusica, who's their agent, and we work with Intermusica a bit, and we also work with Signum Records, who are releasing their albums. So everything just came together in this wonderful way, and it was one of the first shoots out of lockdown. So it was all extremely high energy and joyous the whole day. And really, it's about getting, what is the feeling you want people to feel when you think of the King Singers? And that's all that matters. And once you really nail that down, and it's something that it will be a multitude of different emotions that you want people to feel, but it's pretty simple. Like, technically you need to make sure your lighting is really on point, but it's very similar. There's a lot more people in the room, which can change the energy, and you have to make sure that everybody's on the same level. But they're just a phenomenal bunch of people. Like, they've such a legacy. They've been going for 50 years. So, working with them was just a dream come true. We had so much fun, and we had our amazing hair and makeup team, Charlotte and Katie, with us too. And it was just a wonderful day. It was really, really great.
Have you ever photographed Karita Modula?
No, but she is.
You see that? Yeah. I would cross an ocean for that.
Yeah. Would you cross an ocean just to sit there and be with me through the day?
And Karita. Yeah, that is a match made in heaven in terms of creating a great photograph.
Yeah.
Because you're similar people in certain ways.
Really?
In certain ways. In terms of the energy, in terms of the audacity and the desire to create something great artistically, the humor, there's a lot going on there. And she's a very beautiful woman.
Yes.
And she also has very distinct finished cheekbones,
which
would present opportunities for you as a photographer, that not everyone has that prominent cheekbones in the shape of the face. And she's so much personality in addition to being a magnificent singer. So we have to try to make that happen. I want Karita also to be on the show. She's always welcome. So now I will ask what I asked before. Did I leave anything out that you wanted to talk about?
No, I think we covered everything. Absolutely, yeah. Like, I just really like that we got to have a chat.
Also that. So where can people look at your photographs in our lockdown world? On the website?
Well, we're all over social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. But yeah, no, Marshall Light Studio.
Let's.
Oh, sorry.
I'm a writer.
Marshall Photo, or Marshall Light Studio, or ML Studio. But everything can be linked through to our website, which is marshalllightstudio.com.
With 3 L's, MARSHALLLIGT.
IGHT.
IGHT, as you say.
Studio, yeah.
Studio.com.
We didn't consider the 3 L's at the beginning, and it's I always say it now, but yeah. No, but yeah, everything's absolutely there. And thank you so much. This was gorgeous.
Thank you, my dear. Keep up the good work. And I really hope that my viewers who tend to tune in to meet musicians and writers and so on, you are my first photographer. I had one painter who was an opera singer, Michael Melby. who's a wonderful painter, and he brings his visual style from opera and music, and you're similar in that aesthetic, but photography is different from painting, obviously. And if I wanted one photographer, I wanted the best. So, and you're not allowed to say thank you.
Thank you. No, it's lovely. And I hope to get to you soon. I haven't been on a plane in 19 months.
Nor have I.
I'd say it's killing you slowly.
Yeah.
But I'm
I've
sure
not
these
set foot off
conversations.
Manhattan Island.
Oh, really?
I've not been in public transport. I have walked everywhere. I've gotten a new foot doctor. I'm not kidding, because I walk I mean, I'm a walker anyway from New York City, but now I really walk everywhere. And if anyone needs a great foot doctor, we've discussed my dentist. I also have a great foot doctor in New York City. Get in touch. And because we're all changed by this pandemic, obviously.
Hugely.
We are fortunate, those of us who have not been ill. We've lost many people in our profession, in music specifically. And so I'm very mindful of them and I honor them. But I feel it's part of our job to be witnesses and continuity and educators and documentarians in our different ways, me with this program and my writing, and you with your photography. And because people will look back in the future and want to know what happened now. And that's, politicians can't do that, artists can do it.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to know for maybe a decade the impact that it had. But yeah, absolutely. It's been, well, to be stuck in Manhattan, like London and New York are my favorite cities in the world. So you're in one of them, I'm in the other. And absolutely, it's been really strange to be walking through a city like London and it be empty. Like, that just freaks me out completely. Because it is the people that make London what it is, and same with New York.
It's been vacant.
Yeah.
There are people out and about, but this is a city that has vaccinated itself. We early on had some of the biggest amount of cases and deaths in New York City very early on. So we learned from that, unlike other places, and we are largely vaccinated and follow the protocols. But we are very affectionate, tactile, communicative people in New York. We're like the Irish. When you get an Irish New Yorker, that's the maximum. And it's different. It is very different.
Yeah.
And so I truly am grateful to my audience. I've never said this on Adagio, because I hear from all of you, and I know that what I'm doing has impact. And that's why I try to bring people like Fran Marshall, who you may not know, and now you do, at least somewhat. So thank you, my dear. Be well.
Thank
Regards
you
to Sophie and the dogs and the cats. And
she said hello.
Okay, thank you.
Say hello, and to give your mom a hug for me. I'm sure you're allowed.
And we shall see you when times permit.
Talk soon, my dear.
Take care.